started, since Costa Rica is such a hot spot, I'm going to do it through the travel. And how many of you like me again? Yeah, it's an amazing country. And kind of a second little pre-talk comment. The pictures, the images you're going to see up here are at times going to link in with what I'm talking about. And but if you consider it more as kind of a simultaneous slideshow, there are sometimes direct links and sometimes not. So don't try to follow along with this and think I'm talking about those images. And last comment, I would really like to thank Luann for being my technical support on slide, and Ken Marichak and Luann for assisting with a snippet of a song and also 6 of my students who are have graciously volunteered to do a couple of excerpts out of a performance piece that came out of the experience that I had with the students who were studying for this program I was involved with. Is this on? Test. Yeah. Since this Bergen Forum is listed technically under my name, I'll take the lead on the presentation, but I definitely want to acknowledge that the experiences, discoveries that I'm going to be talking about, Luann and I very much shared with our family, and that both of us spent our spring 2010 sabbaticals in Costa Rica. There's going to be a lot of overlap, things that we both share, but also some that were unique for each of us, so I'll be addressing those from my vantage point. Maybe she'll give a future Berggren on hers. First, I've got to say that this sabbatical, before you go on one, you don't really know what to expect. It's in the future. And I must say that this far surpassed my wildest expectations. So looking at the title of the forum, A Journey of Discoveries, big picture discoveries, big global topics would have to be first Costa Rica itself. Although I had visited there before, I got to know this tiny country in much more depth than I had anticipated, and in many different ways. Secondly, the discovery of the Latin American Studies Program, or LASP, with which I was affiliated as a sabbatical professor. I cannot come close to expressing the deep admiration and positive impression I got from this great study abroad program and its staff. I can talk with individuals later if you're interested in learning more about that. Third major discovery was dealing with the issues of Latin America and looking at how the impact has started 400 years ago with the conquistadores and continuing right on up to the present, largely as a result of the United States and multinational corporations. I gained a much deeper and a more vivid understanding of the often tragic and oppressive last 400 years of this part of the world, going back in time to Columbus and the conquistadores, and it's quite sobering. So there were many tremendous and meaningful experiences. I can't touch on more than just a fraction of them, and hopefully with the limitations of time, and I promise Bill I'll keep it to within our time frame, I'll do my very best to touch on those that stood out most for me. As background, when Luann and I began planning the sabbatical process, coming up with ideas, well, the obvious. First, as a professor of theater, I wanted to spend time working on professional projects in my discipline, which I'm not able to do otherwise. That's the intent of a sabbatical, right? So as I looked at those areas that I wanted to work on, first, as many of you know, with my involvement in the theater department for the last 15, 16 years, I have brought in productions here that have had Latin American or Caribbean themes. Once on This Island, De Donde, Historias para ser contadas, or Stories to be Told, and most recently last fall with Widows. I've also taught the Performing Arts a Global Perspective course 3 times, a couple of times as FYEs, And I frequently, in that, cover South America as one of the central topics, Latin American playwrights and theater movements in Latin America and how those have been used to affect political and social change. And I've also been very much involved in the Global Awareness Committee for years, and it's something I'm very, very much committed to. So professionally, I was looking at these goals, and from there, I then wanted to proceed. Now, personal goals, it was a professional, but from a personal standpoint, for those of you that are not aware of it, I was born in Medellin, Colombia, and raised there and in Puerto Rico for most of the time until I was 16. So very early on, as being a minority American in a majority foreign country, I really learned the importance of immersion in cultures and felt that it was very important for our own children that they share similar experiences as much as we're able to within the complexities of our lives and professions. So this was a major goal that I set up. And lastly, for both personal and professional reasons, linked in with the last one, in that I had grown up and spent much time in Latin America, but it's been many years, decades, since I've been able to live back in Latin America. This was something I really wanted to do, to kind of get back in touch with those early roots. My parents are North American. In fact, I'm very pleased to see that my mom is here visiting from Florida, along with my sister, if you want to wave a hand. So coincidentally, they were here just in time. Pris arrived last night. Yeah. Why Costa Rica? I mean, that's not part of my roots, not part of my background. Well, an obvious one first is that my brother a few years ago purchased an organic farm. He was scrapping for money and asked if I'd help him out. And so we pulled together some funds and said, sure, we'll help you buy it so that you can get it locked in. So in less than a week, we went from not even having the remotest thought of being property owners in a foreign country to being partial owners of an organic farm in Costa Rica. Then a second fascinating aspect of this picture of why Costa Rica was a series of unrelated and highly unusual coincidences, personal and professional, through which I learned of the Latin American Studies program and its executive director, Don Antonio Chamberlain. LASP, just to give you a kind of a little overview, and I'll go into it more later, is an independent, focused study abroad program made up of a consortium of U.S. colleges and universities aimed at students who are studying in Latin American studies or in Spanish. It's based in San Jose, and again, I'll speak more on that later. So anyhow, through early exchanges with Don Antonio, asking him for suggestions, ideas, contacts that he might have in theater and music for both of us, he didn't have any, but one thing led to another, and eventually he hired me. I was selected to be a sabbatical professor. They have a regular slot there to work with this program to bring in an emphasis on the arts, specifically theater. So let's jump into the attractions of Costa Rica, which from the show of hands, clearly many of you are already aware of. Beyond the first stimulus, there are many intriguing topics here. First has got to be the amazing draw of the land itself and the country. This is for tourists, for scientists, for potential immigrants, expats from the U.S., of which there are many, and folks from around the world, many Europeans. First of all, it's a stunningly beautiful country as tropical coastal plains rise to mountains. It has 802 miles of coastline on both the Pacific and the Caribbean. There's one spot, in fact, on the Inter-American Highway, some people know of it as the Pan American, where you can actually see both bodies of water, if the weather is clear, which it often isn't because it's in a rainforest. Most of Costa Rica is dominated by the Sierra Madre Mountains, and Mount Chirripó is the highest, in fact, in Central America at 12,532 feet, where, again, from there you can see both bodies of water. The terrain is literally fractured into 4 individual mountain ranges, and that's as a result of violent volcanic eruptions over eons of time. It's part of the Pacific Ring fire circle, which goes all the way around, as you can see right there, to most recent issues in the world are coming from Indonesia. It's part of the ring. Costa Rica has over 200 identifiable volcanic formations dating back 65 million years. Today, 100 or so show volcanic activity, but 5 are classified as really active. Most of the volcanoes in Costa Rica lie in the northern part of the country in the central highlands. And best known are Poas. This is the most visited volcano in that it's the closest spectacular one to San Jose. And Arenal is legendary. It's a hot tourist spot, largely because of not only the volcano and stunning vistas, but also many, many hot springs and thermal baths. They're stunning views, and it's really a stunning, stunning place. It's a kind of on the must-see list of people that go to Costa Rica. Others are Irasu and Turrialba. Turrialba, by the way, exploded literally days after we arrived in January, spewing ash and lava, and the villages in the area had to be evacuated. This is it right here. And that's one of our pictures, actually, that we took just before we left in April, and it was continuous action. Okay, in the Central Valley, this is the most fertile. There are spectacular landforms. We're at about 3,000, 4,000 feet. It's temperate, fertile, and that's where the largest percentage of the population lives. Now, Costa Rica's beach-covered Pacific coastline is narrow. It's indented with many small bays and many, many beaches. There are 60, actually, that I counted that were written up in Lonely Planet. And, of course, they're not going to be covering all of them. There are lots of hidden beaches and places, and for those of you that are surfers, that's a great spot to go, lots of good wave action. It's probably best known for its national parks and reserves, and this is one of the things that's pretty fascinating, pretty amazing about Costa Rica. The reserves include rainforests, cloud forests, diverse habitats. 11% of the land mass is national parks. Think about that. I don't have a comparative to the U.S., but that's an amazing amount of land. 24%, 1/4 of the land mass is protected. There are 26 national parks and a total of 68 refuges. There is a wildlife corridor which stretches all the way across the country, north to south, from Nicaragua to Panama, allowing animals to have free access across the entire country without dealing with cities and population bases. The beauty of the cloud and rainforest is really unique, and it attracts more and more tourists and visitors every year. Costa Rica is right on the edge of ecotourism. Considered to be one of Costa Rica's top attractions, volcanoes, again, draw scientists and tourists, naturalists from all over the world. If you consider, again, the size of Costa Rica, it's about the size of West Virginia, and yet over 5% of the world's plant and animal species live there, making it the most biodiverse country on the planet. Measured in terms of flora and fauna species, per 10,000 square kilometers in Costa Rica, it tops the list of countries with 615 species. And this is in comparison to the United States in the same landmass that has 104. It's the home for over 200 migrating birds, over 10,000 species of vascular plants, 1,300 species of orchids alone. Another fascinating part, why Costa Rica? 80% of Costa Rica's energy is already generated through renewable resources, water and wind primarily. The goal is to be 100% clean, renewable energy and self-sufficient in the next decade. Costa Rica, the recent president, Oscar Arias, who going back has been a very strong leader, legendary leader in Costa Rica going back to the 80s, and particularly because of his standing up to the CIA and the Reagan administration with their intrusion into Nicaragua, said, Costa Rica can only cross the threshold to the developed countries if it achieves to guarantee its population access to sufficient and affordable clean energy, unquote. The supply of 100% renewable energy is also a core of the successor to President Arias, the first woman president of Costa Rica, and his protege, Laura Chinchilla. She expressed that in her campaign and reiterated it in her nomination speech. Another fascinating part of Costa Rica is that it aims to be 100% carbon neutral by the year 2021. Where am I? Where they are? And it's the only country in the in the Western Hemisphere to set this goal, and it's likely to be the first country in the world to actually accomplish it. Because of time, I'm going to skip over some other data, but they have some very fascinating programs, one of which is that, and this has been in place for a decade, 3.5% tax on gasoline goes to about $15 million a year that's distributed to 8,000 property owners to revegetate their land with trees. More than 6 million trees were planted just last year alone. And in the tropics, trees grow fast. Fascinating other attractions, not dealing with the land, but it's dealing with our social programs. It provides free health care to all its citizens. Remember, it's the size of West Virginia. Free education through 12th grade. Cell phone rates, $7 a month approximately. It's all subsidized. It's felt that communication is extremely important. All employers are required to pay into unemployment. As a little background, my brother and I hired a campesino, a worker, to help keep our land clear. And because of the fast growth rate, it's essential that you do that. We were required by law, and they stick to it, that we pay him unemployment, health care benefits, and end-of-year bonus. And if you don't do that, he goes right to court, and we're in big trouble. So it's something that is enforced, especially interesting as we consider the number of illegal immigrants in our country that are exploited by the rich as maids and gardeners. Think about it. Another fascinating aspect of Costa Rica is 82.2% of the population has access to clean tap water. This is unheard of in the rest of Central America and in much of South America. Some other quick facts. The population is about 4.3 million. Population of San Jose is 1 million. The country is predominantly Roman Catholic, 75%. Literacy rate, 96%. Life expectancy average, 79. And I think everyone knows this. Exports that dominate are coffee, bananas, pineapples. Interestingly, that you may not be aware of, textiles, and now getting into technology industries. And last but not least, but this is extremely important, it helps to define or describe why Costa Rica has been able to do so well with its social programs. It obliterated its army in a peaceful revolution in 1948, and all of those monies that went into the military were diverted to education and social programs. That's why this exists. An abbreviated history. I'm going to make this much briefer than what I have. Luana's nodding knowingly, and so is Bill. Christopher Columbus, on his fourth journey to the New World, 1502, that's when he discovered Costa Rica and landed on an island off the coast, looked at it, and named it Costa Rica because of the beautiful landscape. He did not know that it was in fact one of the poorest areas in terms of mineral resources. Quickly that was discovered along the fact that there were hostile indigenous peoples, and it was an incredibly difficult terrain to navigate. So for the most part, Costa Rica went under the radar with the conquistadores, who focused in more on other countries that were much more accessible and where the local populations were much more easily enslaved. That did not happen in Costa Rica because the indigenous, for the most part, were able to escape into the rugged mountains, and there was no way the conquistadores could negotiate those. So going back in history, even 400 years ago, it helps set the tone of why Costa Rica is what it is today. It was not a conquered nation, in contrast to almost the entirety of the rest of South America and Latin America. Key person, I'll just touch on this one. In 1948, I mentioned that was when there was a peaceful revolution. What happened was that it had been a democracy, longest-standing democracy in Central America, well over 100 years, but the party that was elected, United Social Christian Party, in 1948, refused. They were beaten, and they refused to give up the office. This is not an unusual scenario in many Latin American countries. There was a civil uprising. It was led by José Don Pepe Figueres, and in the end, the government that was in power withdrew. Don Pepe became the president. He immediately banned the Communist Party, but the country remained to be socialist. Women could vote, very unusual. Blacks gained citizenship, which up until now had not. I'll divert a little bit. For the most part, the African heritage peoples came to Costa Rica in the mid-1800s as recruited by the corporations that were dealing with fruits. United Fruit Corporation didn't exist at that time, but it was the forerunners of those, and the government in association with the idea of building a railroad from the Central Valley to the coast. This was the Atlantic coast, the city of Limon. The people that were brought in to work on it, because it was so grueling, many deaths also occurred because of disease, were brought in primarily from Jamaica. And after the railroad was built, it allowed coffee to go directly to Europe and straight up the coast to the U.S. The blacks were not given access to go back home, essentially indentured servants. And so here they were, marooned, unable to go back to their families, and they were a people without a country. So this was changed when Don Pepe came into power. Blacks gained citizenship, and I mentioned his most brilliant stroke was the obliterating of the army. I don't have time to go into it right now. Many of you would probably ask, well, how does it protect itself? Maybe if there's time at the end, we can talk a little bit about that. I'm going to jump into talking now about that second wonderful discovery. This was Costa Rica itself and its history, and fascinating looking at the growth there. The other part was the Latin American Studies program with which I was affiliated. This was the most meaningful part of my experience in terms of a fulfilling time. You know, I'd read about the goals of the program, but it wasn't until I arrived and I met the team that I realized just how outstanding a program it was. The dedication of the faculty, the staff. A major mission here was to pretty much open up eyes of students coming from colleges across the United States who grew up in our educational system and perhaps had biases or misperceptions, or at least a United States perspective on Latin America and South America. It's very different than the perspective of Latin Americans towards themselves and Latin Americans towards the United States. Some key goals here. It introduces students to a wide range of experiences through study of language, literature, culture, politics, and it's not Costa Rica. It's Central America and Latin America. Of course, since it's based in Costa Rica, there is some emphasis on that as well. Dealing with the religion of the region, there is a strong focus on getting students to engage with critical thinking, to question, to dig deeper. And it really throws the gauntlet down to challenging them to examine their preconceptions and some of the things that perhaps they had heard about in earlier years or in earlier parts of their education. Every student lives with a Costa Rican family. They're all homestays, so that is part of the experience. They all take part in internships and practicums, and they also travel to, in the semester that we were there, to Nicaragua for a 2-week homestay. I'll be talking about that later. And then also approximately 2 weeks in Cuba. This semester is structured in the following way. The first half is spent, all of the students are in core curriculum. And it is through that they really get a solid foundation to then help prepare them for the second half of the semester after spring break or fall break, whichever applies. In the second part of the curriculum, they go into areas of concentration, such as language study or Latin American literature, environmental sciences, and so on. Places that were included in the first half of the semester during that core curriculum, and this is only about 6 to 8 weeks, visits to an organic farm, a banana plantation, coffee plantation, pineapple plantation. A high point trip was to the city of Limon. I mentioned that earlier. And the intention of that was to do hands-on research on the issues of the link between racism and poverty in Costa Rica, something that as tourists frequently you may not be tuned into or made aware of. I'll sidetrack a bit. Limon, because of its Jamaican heritage, has a strong Caribbean flavor. The music, reggae, there's a Caribbean flavor to the music, which is very different. The majority population is of African heritage, Caribbean heritage. And as a result of its early history, it has been strongly discriminated against. And by the rest of the country, if you mention Limon, they say, oh, don't go there. That's dangerous. There are hoods, there are criminals, there are gangs. Don't go there. So the students, for our 4-day excursion on this field trip, interviewed 3 minimum people in Limon, and then the equivalent number in San Jose, very different culturally, and linked those together to look and really dig deeper, combined with their readings and lectures, on the link between racism and poverty. It was an eye-opening experience when they're having to go out to the street and talk to people that are out there. It was a tremendous experience. They ended up writing, was about an 8-page paper as a result of that. We also attended or went to one of the last vestiges of the indigenous peoples. These are the Bribri people on the East Coast who are hanging on by a thread in terms of the survival of a society, of the people. Fascinating visit. One of the things that was most amazing was a visit to Earth University. If you want to write that down and look it up on the web, I would encourage you to do so. But it's a fascinating university, private nonprofit, funded by, I think it was Fulbright, but a Ford Foundation, a number of, this is one of the things we've done right down there. And the focus of this is for students that show great promise throughout the third world. It's not just Latin America. To study in agricultural sciences and natural resources so that they can contribute to sustainable development in the tropics. That's a goal statement of Earth University. So look that up if you have a chance. A capstone, certainly, during that core curriculum was our trip to Nicaragua. And again, the theme of experiencing personally elements of poverty. Nicaragua is the second poorest nation in the Americas, just behind Haiti. I'm going to start on the the second half of the term first because of just to return somewhat to the country and the nature of it. And I was fortunate to be invited to be an active participant, although nothing in my background professionally is with environmental studies. That was the one I wanted to tie into. And as a result, we took 3 weeks to tour around the entire country, going to all of the major ecosystems with a scientist who was brought down from UC Berkeley in California, an ornithologist, and it was a tremendous experience. Key spots that we went to, you're now seeing images of Arenal, the volcano that I mentioned that is kind of legendary for Costa Rica. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. One thing that is, I mentioned that there are lots of thermal baths or hot springs. One fascinating one that stood out and we went to was of a graduate from Earth University 5 years ago. And his family owned this property going way back for, 100 years. A peasant family, a farmer family, not much development, and they put up a little restaurant there on their property. But they had this hot springs. This young man, as his thesis project with Earth University, developed a plan for total self-sufficiency of a tourist-oriented hot springs that would, again, be able to rely on all of its energy. It incorporated a biodigester that in 45 days could process raw human waste and vegetable matter waste from the restaurant, which is part of the hot springs, and turning it into totally usable composted soil that would then be used to distribute to farmers within the region, as well as for them growing their own crops. The methane that was collected off of the biodigester, this is an enormous thing. It's probably as far from here to the back wall. They're able to bottle this methane and provide it at very low cost to the local farmers, far cheaper than any other energy that they would buy. They would use it themselves for all of their gas needs. They said, and I guess I better not give you, no, I will give you the name of the place. It's Eco Termales. But they were concerned when they told me, we use it for cooking, but don't tell anybody. They wouldn't like it if they knew their own waste material was going into the flames that cook their food. They had trout ponds and fully sustainable, and they also used the methane for their dryers that would dry all of the towels. They also have a policy of limiting the number of people that can come in 4 hours' time to 100. This is because the biodigester is not designed for any more than that. They're not driven by the more and more and more money, make as much as we can. They know their limits on how they can best optimize this. He's accomplished this in 5 years' time. Pretty impressive. I think our favorite place had to have been, and certainly this was for Jesse, our 12-year-old, and my mom and my sister were able to go there as well, was Parque Nacional de Quetzales, translated the National Park of Quetzals. How many of you have heard of Quetzals? I'll just flip through this. It's a stunningly beautiful bird, and some people go to Costa Rica alone just to see the Quetzals. Let's flip through these. I'm going to jump ahead and now go to the first part of the semester, and that was the core curriculum. And I'm going to pull out, first of all, one comment. Because of everything that I've mentioned and the public relations that Costa Rica has gained, it is has been written about as being the happiest country in the world. There's a comment here, a newspaper article, if you want to look it up, it's online, written in the New York Times by Nicholas Kristof. Some of you may have read him. Here's a little comment that he has here. There are several ways of measuring happiness in countries, all inexact. But this pearl of Central America does stunningly well by whatever system is used. For example, the World Database of Happiness, compiled by a Dutch sociologist on the basis of answers to surveys by Gallup and others. Costa Rica is in the top spot out of 148 nations. Just for contrast, the U.S. is 20th. I will not go into the criteria. It's fascinating. There's a counter article written by Justin Wolfers that says, is Costa Rica really the happiest nation on earth? You can look that up as well if you like, or talk to me afterward. But it draws into question some of what he says. But the bottom line is, yes, Costa Ricans are happy, but that's not the whole picture. One of our most touching presentations, lectures in the first half of the semester was with one of the faculty members, a former Supreme Court lawyer who moved over to LASP, Javier. Talked about how can you call us the happiest when you look out on our streets and see nothing but garbage, when you see bars on every window, that people are constantly concerned about being broken into, of thieves. There are two sides to the story. It was a fascinating approach. A lot, to put it into a synopsis of what Javier spoke about, is that their zenith, their peak was in the late 70s. But in the 80s, when depression hit and recession hit other parts of the world, it hit Costa Rica as well. With all of the social programs they put in place, and this is resonating somewhat with what we're experiencing here, it cost a lot of money. It created a Godfather syndrome with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, so that money that they borrowed to help build this infrastructure now put them beholden to those power structures, which then pressured them into bringing in more multinational corporations and CAFTA, which came in a decade later, 2 decades later. But it was something that went from where the population was reaching a zenith on social reforms and providing for the people into kind of a steady demise. Most remarkably was the loss of private property bought by multinational corporations for their monocrop industries of pineapple that ships right to Europe and to the U.S., bananas, and so on. So it had a severe impact. The most touching, however, presentation was that of a gentleman, Elmer, who came from El Salvador. And Elmer grew up in the garbage dumps outside of San Salvador, the capital. To cut to the chase, I know I'm running tight here. There was an activist movement largely led by Oscar Romero, Archbishop Oscar Romero, to help bring social reform and especially just the basic needs of the population, housing and food. He went to these garbage dumps, Romero did, and they became empowered and started marching for those simple human rights. Elmer, having grown up, knew nothing but hunger. And that was a part of his life. He said, it was my friend. It was my constant companion. I wore it like clothes. But he became involved in this movement. And cutting short on the story here, he said that as they were marching, a peaceful march to the center of the city, coming out of the garbage dump, thousands and thousands of people, that they heard a distant sound, and as it got closer and closer and closer, discovered that it was helicopters. It was the military coming in. They started indiscriminately shooting into the thousands of people, killing people randomly. And he looked up and he saw the insignia of the United States Army on those helicopters. It was at that point he tore up his most prized possession, which was a wrinkled up postcard he'd found as a child. He was 16 years old. This is one of his paintings, by the way. He completely lost his faith in that image of the golden vassal up north, of which was the United States. I'm going to come to the end because I want our performers to get up. And this piece, you folks can go ahead and come on up and set up your chairs as I'm speaking. Nicaragua capstone trip was an incredibly powerful experience. And out of it, a performance piece was scripted, which thankfully to our 6 folks here, we're going to do a couple of excerpts. And it addresses their discoveries of Nicaragua. So with that, I don't have time to go into Nicaragua itself or any of its history, but hopefully you can get a taste, a little bit of how meaningful this trip was from the presentation that they'll give.
The picture that you see up there is actually the lineup of crossing the border from Costa Rica into Nicaragua, which took us 3 hours both ways. Nicaragua is incredibly poor, but the spirit of their people is incredible as well. They are so welcoming. They love their country. So Ken has figured out, using a recording, some accompaniment, and this is a song that's very, very special to them. And I have a cold, so put up with me. Ay, Nicaragua, Nicaragüita, la flor más linda de mi querer, abonada con la bendita Nicaragüita, sangre de Diriahen. Ay, Nicaragua, sos mostusita, que la milieta de Tamagas, pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho